would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it.
You can always edit it.
Yeah. All right, tonight I am joined with Drew Mackinnon. Did I pronounce that right? Is it Mackinnon?
Yes.
Mackinnon.
Yes, you did.
Of Ascension Excursions. He's got a background in Kemetic studies, Hinduism, mysticism, Sufism. He's a family man as well. But yeah, basically, he's traveled to many of the most amazing sacred sites that we all may be familiar with, at least a large portion of them, as there are obviously so many. Is there anything else additionally that you'd like to add about yourself or your background before we kind of get into it a little bit?
I mean, I'm just into a lot of different stuff. Art. I'm also on a Masonic education committee with a local Masonic lodge here in California, where we do research and then present it to, different Masonic lodges and whatnot.
Yeah, I think you had mentioned one of the recent ones that you did. It actually got into a little bit of the Hindu stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been on pardon me. I've been on like a big, India is one of those places I'm always like, I'm the biggest salesman of India or the Middle East. That's what my friends will say. They're like, okay, dude, we get it. So I did a recent one on a temple I visited on my last trip to India, which was in November into December. I was there in 2022, right before my son was born. So it was a bit of a spiritual trip in itself. So, yeah.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing like the whole travel guide thing and all that?
The travel guide is a recent endeavor with my girlfriend and I over the last, God, it's almost 7 years. We've been traveling together to all over the world, really. We usually are on a trip, I would want to say like every 3 to 4 months, continually. All throughout the pandemic, I traveled as well, to the places I could go. So just always pushing the boundaries, I guess, of what, you can and can't do.
Definitely.
So,
yeah. So have you always been pretty intrigued and interested in just ancient like cultures and civilizations and all that, or did you kind of come into it in an odd way, or how did you get into all that stuff?
it started when I go, like, your mom or your family will give you like old stuff from school or old, studies that you did. I look back on it and I'm like, you're writing about aliens, you're writing about, Bigfoot or whatever the story is, or, myths. I was really into Egypt at a young age. I think in the 90s, it was kind of like a big revival period. I think that's, when Tutankhamun came to, the US again, and, and they tour him different museums and stuff like that. So just always grew up around it. My mom has a master of fine arts, so I was always in and around museums and galleries as a kid. So always symbolism, that kind of thing. And then just through traveling, and just kind of the journey in life. You go down the rabbit hole and you kind of just end up staying there, I guess. That's why I tell everybody, I'm like, hey, once you start, it's pretty much, it's over, you know?
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah.
And you speak a few different languages as well, is that right?
More so conversationally, to get around in countries, slang dialect. Obviously, when you're learning a language, most of what you'll learn, you can pretty much throw out the window. You might go to Egypt and the dialect in Cairo is different than, Siwa or different places. So you can learn the traditional languages, but I like in India, I can speak conversational Hindi and Arabic, conversational enough, Turkish, same, um, Spanish, those things, and I'm constantly learning them because the origins of words are very important when you're doing study, as I'm sure many of your guests know as well. Particularly anything. Yeah, I know you're a huge alchemy guy, so most of the texts are in Arabic or you know just old English. So you really kind of got to dive into it, and I guess you have to re-educate yourself. So through the study of language, particularly if you're studying Hinduism, it's like you really got to start diving into the etymology of the words. Otherwise, you're just saying moksha or om. It's like you got to know what these things mean. So um, it definitely is a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I wish there's a few languages I wish I was fluent, or I wish I understood and was able to at least read, especially like you had mentioned in regards to all these mysterious alchemical manuscripts and whatnot. I think Arabic would be a big one, and Latin would be awesome to be able to
Yeah.
know and read. But yeah, that's awesome. And did you kind of
Even
you just pick up a lot? Yeah, go ahead. What were you saying?
no, 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 no. Particularly with Arabic, I mean, you look at the early alchemical studies that were going on and the names that come up, and they're always, guys will say, oh, it's Jabir or Jaber,
Geber.
and it's like, yeah, Gabber. The funny thing about it is his, like, when you study the name, the origins of words, you'll find out that they end up in our own English dictionaries. Like gibberish is referred to by Jaibir.
Mhm.
So it was like what they ended up, sorry, I have so
Oh,
many
no worries.
cats and animals in my house. So that's because people didn't understand the studies of the occult and alchemy. They're like, well, this guy's, they gave him the name gibberish,
Yeah, I
as I
think
can live.
with like
Yeah.
Paracelsus, his full name, I think Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, something along those lines. But I think
Yeah.
that's where the bombastic word comes from, because you,
Even, yeah, even with, alchemy is very interesting. I know we're going all over the place, but I kind of figured this was how this would go. Even with Renaissance art names and names of artists are very alchemical in a sense, Italian names, and
yeah.
it gets very interesting.
So you're particularly like passionate about Egypt, India, and the Middle East, all of that. I've read that Hinduism's arguably one of the oldest religions in the world. Would you agree with that in your research and your studies?
You know, when I put together a project, if I'm doing research, whether it's on Egypt, on Turkey, I've spent a lot of time in Turkey, so I'm always diving in there, or India, you end up having to throw the dates out a bit because everything's kind of like, oh, the Sphinx is this old, the pyramids are this old, and you kind of just get, I guess, kind of tied into the whole the idea of, oh, I know this date is this or that, but Hinduism definitely has some of the oldest texts, surviving texts. So, in regards to, I think, some scholars that I guess you could kind of trust or research wise, they want to say, popping up around like 2500 BC, probably, like I said, with the dates, it all has to do with what was before, what was after. It's like the pyramids of Giza are completely different than anything else you see in Egypt.
Yeah.
So does that fall in the same category as this temple, or you kind of fall down that same rabbit hole of, are we looking at it from the time structure, or what is the purpose? I think, really. And Hinduism, the more I research it, the more it connects just so many dots. And for anybody that's interested in, astrology or even some alchemical components and whatnot, you can connect so many dots with it. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. And man, there's a variety of Hindu texts, and something I haven't explored deeply enough as I would like to and look pretty closely at or anything like that, but it's all very mysterious and interesting to me, and it's just a whole nother world. I wonder, what are some of the maybe like the primary texts of Hinduism, and or maybe some of the philosophies that sort of set it apart from other systems?
Well, they'll obviously the Vedic texts, some of the older ones, there's the same thing with the dates. They could be a couple hundred years old, not a couple hundred, but they go from like 1,000 to this is 10,000 years old, so you can look at the Vedanta, which in Sanskrit it translates to the end of knowledge. So the Vedanta is a really good one to look at. You can look at the Bhagavad Veda. There's hundreds and hundreds. And when you're reading them from, these are poems, these are allegories for how to live your life with the different deities, and you're taking them as into your own self. So there's a number of, the quintessential thing that I get from it is the ego death, which you can find in a lot of different cultures. But Hinduism really, for me, is very much like set in stone: ego death, ego death, ego death.
Oh, yeah.
You have, yeah. I know it's such a big context of work. When you're looking at dharma, you're looking at karma, you're looking at Brahma, which is energy, the universe. Everything is Brahma. So it's like your base, that's your earth. And then above that, you have your creation, which is Vishnu, which is the god that is associated with the sun. And then above that, you're starting to create like the feminine and the masculine. So it's like this whole wide variety of energy and how our energy influences everything around us, what you manifest, what your intentions are. So a lot of the things I'm seeing today, with this new Renaissance period that we're seeing with magic, alchemy, all the different orders that are kind of coming back into light, whether it's the Order of the Golden Dawn, Freemasonry, all these different esoteric organizations are having a renaissance. And so much of it really is, there's so many links back to different civilizations. And, it's connecting the dots with Hinduism it just gets, you go down the rabbit hole, and I feel like you just end up staying there.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if you have come across this. I stumbled on some videos. I don't know if it's TikTok or Instagram or something along these lines, but there was this, I guess, this discovery fairly recently of this like huge, massive library in Tibet. I think some monastery. What was it? Like the Sakya monastery, I think. And I don't know if you've come across it, but I guess there's like thousands of old Sanskrit texts that they had discovered behind some wall or something along these lines. And I'm just like, wow, there's so much to come to light that, is still to this day, it's just never ending being discovered.
Yeah, it's a very unique part of the world. You're finding these texts. I have not heard this before, but I know the oldest reported college ever to existed was in India. It's the first university. And I know there's another, because that's another thing. When you look at higher education in the past, it was really it was a mixture of both, your logical, but such an emphasis on spirituality as well. Because I believe the old world studied the idea of ritual rather than routine. And this is something that I've learned in my life. Whereas if the Western world is so hyper-focused on routine and how we make money, how we do these things, and when you just simplify it all and go back to your own ritual, your energy, your Brahma that you want to put out, understanding that and understanding the impact of your consciousness and how you yourself can create and heal. There's a lot of proof in positivity. So there's a lot of history in these texts, like you're saying. So, those who have the information, it's kind of like you can, it's
Yeah.
a slippery slope.
It's much more of a holistic way of being and just an overall holistic approach to life, it seems, when you're exploring a lot of these ancient traditions and whatnot. And I just think it's also
It's,
fascinating.
yeah, I mean, it's such a personal thing for me. So when I talk about it, it's like everybody's journey and anything that they're in is such uh, it belongs to you, how you feel, your passion with alchemy. It's like, hey, so and so says that this is the way to do it, but this is what feels right for me. In Hinduism, they call that ishta, which means there is no wrong.
Mhm.
How you believe something, how your heart believes it, that is called ishta. So there's no wrong way to pray or to participate in ritual. There are sages and guides in Hinduism to this day, and I look at it very much so in an ancient mystery school light through my study. So when I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, there's a lineage, there's legacy. If you're taught by a Bhagawan or a Baba or guru, it's all kind of the same idea of Lord, or,
Mm.
those that study the Vedic texts and they're teaching you the allegories, whether it's teaching you ego death, you're taught from a lineage. They're basically doing commentary on the Vedas. So when you're listening to gurus, they're they're coming up with their commentary of what the text means to them. That's their jury. You're like, why can't I get so spiritual? Why don't I feel the way he does? Because that's his ishta,
Ah,
you know?
that's
I'm trying to like, because when I get into the language stuff, I kind of like disappear back into that mind of being in India. If it's like a different thing.
yeah. How long? I'm curious. What are some of the periods of time that you've spent there? Have you, absorbed yourself pretty immersively in the
I
culture?
Um, it's such a big country. There's 7 states in India, and every part of it is so vastly different. The first time I've been twice, and I've spent a few weeks every time that I've been, and I plan on going back later this year, probably November
Yeah.
would be the soonest I can make it out there.
Is it
Um,
interesting going there and then coming back here to, society
yeah,
as we have it in the Western world? I bet it is just kind of, I bet you notice a lot of really interesting things in regards to maybe like cultural behavior and whatnot, just because it seems like, I mean, India is such a foreign, I mean, when it comes to foreign countries, it's one of the more uh um yeah, just foreign, just different and
it's got that forbidden ominence to it. It's got such a when I first told people I was going to India, it was like the things that I was told or heard were just, you know, being from the West, being from California, it's you get into people have perceived notions about the rest of the world and how dangerous they are. I'm like,
yes.
I've been in Egypt twice. I've been in India. I've been in Turkey. I've been in Jordan. You know what I mean? Like I haven't seen anything on the scale I've seen it out here, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like
Totally. I could
like I
only
said,
imagine.
people are living a ritual. What I, from my understanding or how I feel about it, my belief is that they're practicing ritual in every aspect of their lives. Whether you are in the Middle East and you're say you're practicing Muslim or you're into Sufism, the number one focus in your life is what's in your heart, and you
Yeah.
become it. I know this is a old term, right? That in which you identify with is that in which you become. So there's so much. It's something else. But coming back during the pandemic, especially, was. I mean, I went right to Turkey. I was in I was in Vietnam, in Cambodia, right when China started to have the pandemic going on in that December, right? You remember like around Christmas, you're hearing the stories about what was going on.
Oh yeah.
And I remember I was watching the news when I was there, and I went to Angkor Wat. I was in the north and south in Vietnam. And I was like, you know what? They're putting so much emphasis on this. I think that this is probably going to come home. And it was like, boom. But I went a couple months after I went that summer to Turkey during the pandemic. And I remember people were like, you can't go anywhere, you can't do this. And it's like, you'd be amazed at what you can do if you set your mind to it or just kind of jump right into it.
I bet. Yeah, it
So,
seems like it'd also be such an awesome time to go while everybody's feeling that way. I mean, there's probably a
oh,
lot less traffic going through those areas.
yeah. I mean, the whole journey that I've gone on the last uh, over 10 years before I met my girlfriend, I was still traveling, but together it was kind of just pushing the envelope and being able to go to Göbekli Tepe on that trip in summer of 2020, and there being maybe 4 other people there. So
Wow.
to really see the site without the noise. But
Yeah,
it's that's not a very popular site as far as, hey, let's go to Göbekli Tepe, honey. You're very close. You're basically on the Syrian border in that part of Turkey. So it's very rural. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. I mean, I huge salesman for Turkey, but
yeah. Yeah, I haven't
yeah.
traveled as much as I would like to, out of country at least. And but one of the places that I have gone is Belize, and I do. It's funny because you were talking about, people always will make comments and be like, "Oh, you shouldn't go there, like the crime and this
Oh
and that."
yeah.
I had people like sending me articles of like all of these, people murdered and all this stuff. But man, I tell you what, like some of the nicest people I've interacted with, we actually broke down at one point. We got stuck in the mud. These like 5 guys drove by and then they
Yeah.
saw that we were broken down. They came back, they helped us. We tried to give them money, they wouldn't even take it. Like, so I just think it's probably also dependent on certain areas that you're at. I'm sure like everywhere there's obviously, there's uh ill-intended individuals and whatnot, but it's you'd be surprised.
Yeah. It's like if you're in Egypt and somebody's hassling you, you would say like Mishaiza, Mishais, which means like I don't want it, bro.
Hmm.
Or you call somebody Sadiki, La Shokran. Hey friend, no thank you. Like,
Mm.
but looking the way I do, people don't expect it. I'm not like, you know what I mean? I like show up, I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm a kid from California, and it just like randomly is like Zayik, you can say all these different things to people. And it's interesting when I went to Egypt, I went for after the Turkey trip in 2020, I went to Egypt in 2020 when they reopened, and I went to the pyramids for the first time with nobody in them. So, and before that, I was studying Arabic a bit, just conversationally to try and you have to bridge the gap. I think that's why we're not communicating here in the West. We use the television to communicate. It's like whatever news media you're watching is going to, oh, I can't communicate with these people because they're telling me I can't. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can. It's like it's you just have to find the energy, create energy
Yeah. And
as much as you can.
so you mentioned Angkor Wat, and that is one
Yeah.
of the absolute
Oh,
coolest places that I've
oh,
never
that place is a
seen.
trip. Yeah.
Coolest, like at least that I've come across online. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What was that like?
I would, you know, Angkor Wat, that area obviously has such a turbulent past with the Khmer Rouge and everything that's happened in Cambodia. Um, but that site, because of its location, it's not that heavily visited, but it is without a doubt one of the most incredible sites I've ever been to. Angkor Wat, it's not just the main temple complex. You have several other shrines, several other complexes, but a lot of people are like, "Oh, it's a Buddhist temple." I'm like, it's a it's a temple complex dedicated to Vishnu. So when you're seeing all the images of Angkor Wat with the sun rising over the main Mandir, which is Sanskrit for temple, you're seeing the sunrise in the center point of it. It's an astrological like clock, and it also is surrounded by water sources, and the entire area had a massive community with, agriculture, industry, housing, everything around it. And they were all built on the principles of Brahma and the building ancient Hindu architecture techniques down to grid sizes. Everything was mapped out in their society. So when you look at Angkor Wat as a whole, it makes more sense when you start to study architecture. And the Vishnu temple, the main temple there, is in such good condition, doesn't have, all the pantheon of all the different gods and goddesses still look brand new today. I'm a huge fan of that site. You could spend weeks there and you wouldn't see it all. Very inexpensive country to travel as well. Super safe. People are really nice.
And
just got no to say. It's just
yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say this thing about water. It seems to be a kind of a common thread with a lot of these sacred sites. I'm wondering, have you found this, that many of these sites have some component or association with maybe being linked to any like sacred springs or things along these lines? Because I've come across a few things recently that are kind of indicative of, and I don't know. I mean, there's so many like we're talking about, but is it something that pops up occasionally where you'll find that there is some kind of association with the reverence for water itself and maybe particular healing waters or anything along these lines?
Well, I think healing waters and the idea of like a mineral spring exists in all cultures all throughout the world, right? So in particular to Angkor Wat, that whole water system, the way that it's set up is it self-adjusts because the amount of stones, I think there's something like 10 million blocks that were pre-carved for the main temple complex at Angkor Wat. And if you look at it, it's a very flat marsh. And in order for it to be stable, the entire complex, when you're looking at it from like a drone perspective, it's basically a square with a moat around it, but the moat has a purpose. It also feeds other temple complexes that have other moats. So it ebbs and flows to where it's not sinking into the ground. Mm. So it's all very mathematically genius from an architectural standpoint. And to think it was done X amount of years ago, that's also debatable, right? Somebody could say, oh, it was built 700 AD, and then somebody else, there's a site next door to it that looks the exact same, and they'll tell you it's 2000 BC. That's a very common thing throughout the world.
Yeah, but that's
water. Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
Other water sources that you'll see, like in Japan, if you're up in, I spent some time in northern Japan, Shibu Onsen, which is all onsens. Same thing. Whole culture is, water, the simplicity of ritual in your life, understanding earth, fire, water, ether, air. All these things are so special everywhere in the world. There's not one culture that's just like, whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we don't need that shit. Whatever. We don't care about our water supply. Every Hindu temple has water in it. I mean, there's water storage at Allura Caves, which is some of the stuff I sent you about the cave complex at Kailash Temple, which is dug from the top down. In the very back of it, there's a whole waterway system. If you go to Petra, when you're walking through the canyon, there's a waterway system that feeds in fresh water from wells. The ancient Bedouin people, which are basically the tribal people that live in different areas of the Middle East, they all know where water is. They know how to find water without any gadgets.
Wow.
So,
yeah. So I was wondering if like something that it's probably something you run into all the time in terms of like archaeological dating of sites and even things like carbon dating. I remember listening to this long ass podcast. I think the Brothers of the Serpent podcast. So shout out to them.
Okay.
But they did, just a super in-depth like episode about the details and the science of carbon dating, and even it is up for debate. So it's like
that's what I mean. It's like, hey, is the Sphinx a lion? Is it Anubis? It's got water marking erosion, and it kind of goes, for me, the dating kind of also falls back into the same category. And I understand the importance of dating, especially if you can date anything that's written, any sort of text, these kind of things are very important. But as far as a site goes, so a lot of these temples, the ones that I was just at that are built from basalt volcanic rock, it's like, okay, you can bring out 100 scientists out there. You're going to get a different, it's never going to be, it's a huge window of time.
Yeah.
So that's where the architecture and understanding the architectural design and the style, where you can kind of try and find some sort of blend for it, like you would with cathedrals and sites like that as well.
Yeah, and kind of on the note of architecture and back to, Hinduism and Hindu texts and all of that, have you come across any texts in regards to temple building and or ancient temple builders of this sort?
Yeah. I'm going to give you the name for it. The Vastu Shastra, which is that's Sanskrit for the knowledge of housing, of dwelling. That is in the Vedic text. I can put a couple, I'll send you a couple out, and they're they're so specific where it kind of throws off the ancient aliens idea for me 100%, because it is so specific. Where I look at a temple and I'm like, here's the temple grid. The temple grid shows you all the different spots in the temple where you would go, where the certain deity is going to be, all these where you're going to pray, what direction it's faced in. Is it east to west? It's so mapped out where
Yeah.
it that's where I I always say this to people that want to. I believe in high technology, of course, and lost technology. I'm not going to say, hey, they did this with sticks and stones. You know what I mean? But I do believe in the human consciousness, and also when I see a blueprint that is in a Vedic text, which is showing how they built and designed cities according to temple, it was to keep harmony. So they would put a temple next to the water area. People can come. There's going to be specifics to what is around that temple. All the layout is in the design of these ancient texts. So it's not just like a spaceship showed up and it's like, boom, here you go. Here's Shiva.
Yeah.
So
What are your thoughts on I think it might be the Hindu text. I'm not sure, but like the Vamanas thing. Have you come across that? Like these old they would describe like ships or something along these lines. And I don't know if it was some ships that they had
I've,
created or flying things or something along these
you
lines.
know what? You know what? It's funny that you said that. There is some sculptures that I've come across in Hindu temples that almost look like ships
Hmm.
on the top of these archways. And the arches, I believe, are called Chandarash. Um, and that basically means through the eye of God.
Mm.
So when you're seeing these ancient archways at this last temple I was at, you would, at the top of it, I'm like, what the hell is that? And when you go to do research on an ancient temple site and you're looking into the symbolism, it's like, okay, I know what this is. I know what a serpent around the neck of Shiva is. But when I see something that's different, like you just said, that sparks that. It reminds me of something I saw. So
Mhm.
um, I've heard some of that stuff before, but as far as what I think is mostly what I can feel. It's
Yeah,
my ishta, right? I mean, that's the way I look at
for
most
sure.
things.
And
Is kind of like you could find a little bit of truth in anything, I suppose.
absolutely. Have you ever been to the temples of Bagan? It's like this beautiful, I think it's like miles of just all kinds of Hindu temples. I want to say it's near Thailand somewhere, but
Are you talking about like Burma, or there are some in Myanmar? There are some really, really incredible stupas, like Buddhist stupas. But I have not been to the site you're mentioning. No.
let's see.
Um,
Temples of Old Bagan, Myanmar.
oh yeah, Myanmar. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Burma. Sorry.
Okay, cool.
Or Myanmar. Myanmar is the new name for the country. But um, I'm familiar with that site. It looks beautiful. That's definitely one I want to go out to. I have a couple. I have like a list in my mind anywhere of
I
where I'm
bet.
like, it changes direction so much, but It's like I come back from India and I'll have a friend out there that's like, oh, Drew, did you check this spot out? I'm like, oh, fuck, I got to go back,
Yeah.
So
So
particularly to Elora Caves, I would highly recommend anybody. It's a bit of a stretch to get out there. I'm going to be totally honest with you. It's a very rural area. It's very tribal. So
where's that
I would
located?
definitely, it's about an hour and a half flight from Mumbai, and it's in Aurangabad, which is now it's kind of, Aurangabad was it's taken over, and when there was a conquest and the king tried to destroy a lot of the Hindu monuments, they tried to destroy Ellora Caves and they weren't able to at all.
I think you might have
But
sent
now,
me a video of that. Was that one of the videos that you had sent me?
yeah, yeah. The video I sent you today was from Kailasha. Aurangabad is, like I said, they have a mini Taj Mahal there. It's like an exact replica of the Taj Mahal, except it's much smaller.
And in terms of the functionality or purpose of this particular site with these caves, what do you make of it? Any conclusions in particular?
Oh, oh man. Okay. I believe, yeah, this is one of those ones. I did a presentation on it recently, and it's the thing with Hinduism or any sort of temple site. It doesn't necessarily have to be Hindu. It could be a Muslim's, it could be Muslim, it could be a Christian Coptic church. You always be like, oh shit, I forgot this, or something else you should look into. Um, this site is really a place, Kailasha, it translates to the abode of Shiva, which has to do with Mount Kailash, which is a mountain that you can look up. It looks like a pyramid. Some people think that there's a pyramid underneath it. You're not allowed to access it or climb it. And the idea is that when the time is right, the eye on the top of the mountain is going to open up and kind of like, it's like a awakening, enlightenment, right? But Kailasha Temple is devoted to Shiva and all the different allegories and poems and the ego deaths that you see there. There's certain deities inside there's certain sculptures. When you move around it in a certain way, when you enter a Hindu temple, you go around it clockwise. And so you're like, when you circumnavigate it, there's going to be negative deities on one side and the positive deities are on the inside. So always closest kind of to your heart when you're making your way into it. And you can also use, when you go in it, it's like Mila beads, which are, like the Hindu beads that you'll see with the 108. Are you familiar with like the
Sort of.
108?
I don't
like,
know. I've come across that, but I don't know any details about it.
This is just like one, like you'll see like people, 108, like Shivaji 108, or it has to do with the distance. The sun's diameter is 108 times that of the earth, roughly. And then the distance between the earth and the moon is also 108.
Wow.
Like diameter of the moon. So it's like really bizarre. So if you had on the Mila beads, you would go around one time. If you had the 108, if you have a set of beads that has 54 on it, that's also popular. You would go around twice, these kind of things. But really, it's a high energy place. You go into a temple, you take off your shoes, you're on, granite essentially. There's water there. There's no other electrical sources. So you're basically grounded inside the temple. And when you go around it, you're basically seeing all the imagery of the ego death and different forms of Ganeshji, right? So Ganesh, the elephant, he's going to be holding different things in his hands. So when you're setting the symbolism, you'll kind of know where you're at on the journey. So particularly like what he is holding is going to be like, it will change basically the direction in which you're going to be traveling inside the temple.
Wow.
And also the different forms of Shiva. Like a lot of the deities have 108 different names. So if you've seen like, a Shiva that's dancing, that's called Natraj. Like Ganesh is the Lord of the people. So when you're looking at him, He's basically like the teacher throughout the temple. So each
Is that
form
the
of
elephant?
Ganesh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you might see a Ganesh on the temple with a big head, and that means to like think big. You might see him with smaller eyes. That means that you need to concentrate more. You may see him with a smaller mouth. Means talk less.
Hmm.
Different orientations of where his feet are placed. You know, it's the different orientations of where his tusk is hanging can mean one thing or another. Like if
Nope.
he's got one tusk, it means retain good, throw away bad. So it's very, very detail orientated to the fact, that's when I go back to the ancient alien idea. I'm like, this is so thought out through the symbolism, the teaching of the Vedanta or the different Vedic texts that it's pretty self-explanatory. Like once you go through it, and then when you go to the middle chamber of the temple, depending on what the deity is, this is a Shiva temple, so you're going to see the Shiva lingam, and you can, it's the base of it, right? The base of a Shiva lingam is the Brahma, which is the universe, like I was saying, and then the top of it, sorry, the part from the bottom is then going into Vishnu, the creator, and then you have the destroyer, and then you have the Yanni, which is the feminine, and then you have the lingam itself, which is masculine. So it's like that divine conception of energy, positive and negative, all these different forces in one. And the names of those sanctum sanctoriums inside Hindu temple, it translates in Hindi to Gabah Garith, which is the chamber of the womb. And you'll find that most temples throughout the world all have a womb chamber in them. So it's like a rebirthing area.
Whoa.
So by the time you are going through these temples and you're reading these stories and it's talking about the ego death, um, there's a beautiful thing in the Veda text about Ravanaji. Ravana was a 10-headed deity who wanted to contain Atma Linga, which is the soul of Shiva, which is enlightenment. So when somebody says Atma Linga, it means I have attained the soul of Shiva. I am enlightened, right? But Ravanaji was in the stories of the Vedic text. Ravanaji was, he was basically like a professor, all knowing, strong, had all these characteristics. He also had greed, lust, he sinned, all these things. So he has 10 heads. And there's an image on my Instagram of Ravanaji basically trying to hold up the Shiva lingam. And on top of it has his 9 heads. And his last head is a head of ego.
Mm.
So you can never attain Atmalinga without killing your ego. So
There's so much
to me, when I go in that, dude, that's what I'm saying, bro. Like it's, when you're like, hey, explain something, I'm just like, oh shit, here we go. You know what I mean? It's exciting because Ravana G, when I was doing my presentation, I'm like, don't be Ravana G. I'm not an expert. You know what I mean? I am a seeker. I am looking for that self. In Hinduism, they call it moksha. Moksha is liberation. Liberation from what? Liberation from your ego, liberation from karma, liberation from reincarnation. Hinduism and reincarnation, I think Western ideology is oh, you get to come back, right? That's the perception of reincarnation, right? Oh, I come back as a cat, or I come back as a different form. In Hinduism, your karma is what determines that. And moksha is a liberation from reincarnation.
Wow. Yeah, all this
So
encoded
moksha is to
meaning.
be, yeah, I'm doing my absolute best, bro, to explain it in like a way that, whoever's listening to this right now, listeners, when you're, is finding yourself, you know, in whatever it is. I think all the reason people are drawn to different religions and whatnot. And I'm a practitioner of the world. I don't practice one thing. I think, like I said, once you go down the rabbit hole, oh, I like a little bit of this. I like a little bit of that, you know? Um, so it's finding the liberation for me is to be yourself. And when I go to a temple like that, that shows me certain things, and these stories are so well played out. And when you're looking at Shiva Ji and he has the three ash marks on his head, that means human fear, rage, and lust. So Shiva is known as the destroyer, but that's your guy. Shiva is in Hinduism is to destroy your fears and to go into your fears, whatever they may be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so
What's
interesting
stopping you from
because
being,
a lot of, outside perspectives that are more closed off to just even looking at these sort of things or learning about them, they might hear something like Shiva the Destroyer and then just immediately be like, oh, destruction, that's bad. Like, and then not want to
yeah,
even look any further, but it's just so much more in depth than all of that. And with all these levels of symbolism and like this 108 thing that you were bringing up, it's just another indication that they were very knowledgeable in terms of their relation to the external, as far as the sun, the moon, the planets, and all of that. It's just really fascinating.
yeah. They definitely were doing some state of the art stuff. I mean, when I first saw it, when I first went to India, my first trip, I went to Delhi. I was in Varanasi. I was in, I was up by the Pakistani border, so I visited Sikh temples, the Golden Temple up there, and which is, that's a whole other gambit, right? Sikhism is very interesting and has such a strong culture where it is all ritual, entire place. So there's so much history throughout the country where you go in the south and the colors of the temples are different and the dialect's different. It's endless. So
So with Egypt, my friend Ike was just in Egypt doing some like video logs and whatnot that he put up on his
I've
Patreon.
talked to Ike. I've
Oh
talked to
yeah.
Ike a little bit. Yeah, I was sending him some stuff before he went. I was super stoked he got to go. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, he
great
ended
guy, by the way.
he's amazing. One of his videos, he ended it with the notion of basically like humanity carrying out seemingly impossible feats in regards to things like these incredible structures when we work together in harmony, and that perhaps this was the greatest secret of the ancient builders. And I thought that was interesting. It kind of mirrors a little bit of what you're saying with, you know,
Crazy.
it is
Yeah.
it is possible that these were, even Egypt perhaps was maybe built by actual builders in some way that we're just not unaware of. And I know that, you've heavily studied Egypt, and there's so many various perspectives on how some of these structures were built and the intricacies and the weight and size of the stones and so many theories of what do you think? What do you feel somewhere maybe a product of mechanical technological assistant or some sort of insanely cooperative effort? What do you make of that?
Um, this is like I love Egypt. So, what do I say? How do I start this? In regards to the pyramids, when I said earlier and when we started talking, are different than anything else in Egypt, right? So that's pre-dynastic, but they're trying to say that it was the Great Pyramid was built by Pharaoh Khufu, and the other one was Khafre and Menkaure, and the three pyramids at Giza. And when you're in the pyramids, the biggest thing when I tell people or I'm doing a presentation on Egypt is that there's no hieroglyphics in any of the pyramids, and none of the mummies have ever been found, or alleged mummies. There wasn't any bodies found in any pyramids that I've been in. And also, I when I was in it, my first impression was, it's gonna sound wild, but I was like, it breathes like a living thing. I'd love to hear. I don't know if I'm sure Ike went in it, or I've been in it twice, and when you're walking inside the Great Pyramid, all the ventilation shafts, when they're going, it really sounds like a breathing, living thing. So for me, it's like a monument for questioning everything, and when I look at it, it's easy to say, oh, aliens, cool, I'm done. Okay.
Hmm.
Pass the potatoes, bro. But it's funner for me to imagine the harmony, like Ike's saying there, I like that, of the human consciousness being able to create something. And if we look at the past, I know we're also fixated on the future, that we're not even present anymore today. But if you study the past, you can really start to understand your own present state. Because when you're around it, you're like, oh, all the stuff that's created right now has already happened, but in a different, maybe not the most technical form of it, but it's been done. There was medical, Egypt has the medical history in Egypt is there's temples that are dedicated to, you'll see hieroglyphs of surgical tools. Even when you look back at when Julius Caesar was in Egypt with Cleopatra, their son was named Caesarion because that's what they were doing. Caesarion. They named it Caesarion because there's a C-section to remove the baby.
Yeah, I think I came across something a while ago too about they were
Yeah.
doing like brain surgery or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the spiritual stuff in Egypt, and the relation to the sites in India, to me, are, because I know people looking at sites like Punapuku and places in Peru and a lot of stuff in Mexico and South America, but India and Egypt have so many commonalities. You have the temples that are, I know maybe you're familiar with false doors,
No, I'm not.
like, so in Egypt and also Cambodia, I've seen them. Hindu temples will have basically the idea. Sorry to segue back to this, but in Egypt, they'll see a false door at Seti the First funerary complex in Abydos, which is a very difficult place to get to. But basically, it's a false door, and it has 7 different gates in it, which correlate to your 7 chakras. Like the intention of it, when you're looking at, the different studies and the different mysticisms of ancient Egypt, it correlates to all your 7 different chakras and these doors. And then in the Hindu temples, the idea of the false door is all of this is one thing, right? But you're supposed to see it with nothing there. It's the Brahma, right? You create an opening beyond the false door, in a sense of like,
Have they ever looked behind any of these false doors, or are we certain that they're all false doors?
I mean, Egypt has been so, over the years, I know there's been so much different work has been done there over time, but the ones at Seti the First, I believe just behind it is a wall. The Seti the First temple also has, oh God, what does it have in it? It has the helicopter scene that you've seen on Ancient Aliens on the ceiling, those hieroglyphs. And then in the back of Seti the First temple, which is interesting, you look this up, is called the Osirion, which is a very interesting site that's also in water. And the Osirion is like an ancient mystery schools. I'm trying to think of this is what I believe it to be. It's a site of initiation. It's an initiation site, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's
So see how it's
kind of
seated in
submerged in
water?
water. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when I went, I couldn't get access to it, which sucked, but I was able to walk around it. I couldn't get down into it, but they also have the tree of life on a wall there in a hieroglyphic, and then there's a tunnel system. So throughout the temple, Seti the First temples in front of the Osirion. So if you're in Seti, the first temple, you're going to see images of Osiris, and then you're going to see Seti himself. It's the mirror image, as above, so below, all displayed throughout the temple. Raising the Jed, which is Osiris's backbone, which has to do with walking upright in life and having like a moral compass. So there's a lot more to Egypt than just the idea, oh, they buried people in here, let's leave. It has there's so many new discoveries. When I went on this last trip, when I was last there in 2021. I went to Valley of the Kings, right? Valley of the Kings is where Tutankhamun's buried, whom Tutankhamun, he's the son of Akhenaten, whom you may be familiar with. Akhenaten was kind of known as, they call him the heretic king. He's the one that believed in the Aten, which is the sun disk. A lot of people think that he's the first to come out with monotheistic religion in the world.
And yeah, I mean, you've obviously visited a ton of areas. I wonder, like, what are some of the most interesting sites in Egypt in particular, or areas that you've visited that you just find of particular interest? And maybe you could discuss a little bit about your experience in terms of the energy as well. It's something you'd mentioned a little bit earlier.
Yeah. I'm just going to spout off a bunch of sites and kind of just go for it. Okay. Derinkuyu in Turkey, which is an underground city there. That site's got a lot of energy. The very base bottom of it, this was an underground city that was inhabited by estimates and dating, all that. I'm not going to get into the dating of it because it could be disputed on whatever. You're off 6 months, you're an asshole. So there's a lot of that's a worse thing about esoteric mysticism or alchemy or anything. There's a lot of gatekeepers or people that are very excited to jump down your throat. But Derinkuyu, this site, 20,000 people at one time were using it. At the very base level of it, I want to say it goes down. This is carved straight down. There's many different chambers, full on city, but at the very bottom, there's a full cross that's been dug out. And when you stand in the center of the cross, it is the most quiet, besides the King's Chamber at Giza. It's so quiet there. I can't even, it's something else. It's cold. This is where monks were thousands of years ago. It's crazy. That site always sticks out in my mind. They were also hiding from something. If you look at pictures of Derinkuyu, I know it was just on the show with not Randall Carlson.
Graham Hancock.
One guy Graham Hancock. He showed it, but they have these wheels that shut out the barriers. So the exit points of Derinkuyu, the underground city, they have these giant stone wheels that they would put in front of the doors to keep people out or keep something out. Or there's ideas that, there was a cataclysm and they hid down there and had supplies or, whatnot. That site's really interesting. There's some cisterns in Istanbul that are unbelievably cool.
What's a cistern?
Medusa heads. Cisterns where they would store water in ancient times. You'll see them also in kind of Mithraism, Mithra. You can visit sites that are underground that have water like that, where they would perform rituals. But in Istanbul, there's a couple of them. It's basically water storage, but also it's a huge energy source because you're around water, and also most of these complexes are built out of granite or some sort of, high frequency style design. It's, these are sound healing places. A lot of these places are sound healing, sound bath,
Yeah. Istanbul, that seems like another must go spot as well. I've talked to some people that have been there and they've mentioned that place in particular in terms of just the energy in it. So it seems very interesting.
It's a really cool city. A beautiful city. They have, some of the best food, best people. Shout out to all my friends in Turkey. But it's incredible. Obviously, Constantinople and the history that went through there, and the trade routes, the language, everything is very different. That country has so many different sites. I mean, people think that Noah's Ark is in Turkey, on top of the mountain. You have Göbekli Tepe, you have Hagia Sophia. The mosque there is incredible. Another beautiful temple site. That used to be a church that got changed to a mosque, and so far, so on and so forth. Another place that has energy would be Varanasi in India, which is where the Ganges River flows down, and that's where the bodies are cremated on the river there. I would say that's the heaviest place. Besides the King's Chamber in Egypt, that's the heaviest for me.
Yeah. What was that one called again?
Varanasi, the city of light.
Yeah.
Okay. So Varanasi is where all Hindus want to go to be cremated. It's like that's ritual on steroids. I don't even know the things you see there. You can go there for spiritual healings. There's babas. The babas are bhagawans, or guys that are teaching the Vedic texts, doing the commentary, right? So I'm a healer. I'm basically giving you the allegory. Okay, Sky, tell me about yourself. Okay, this is what you got to do. You got to become, you're a little bit like Ravana G right now, and you got to, you know what I mean? So you got, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you go there and you walk the Ganga G, and you'll see the different shrines, whether it's a shrine to Shiva, Ganesh Ji, Vishnu, Brahma. Brahma's always shown in the sky. You'll see him as like an old man, and he's pointing in the cardinal directions. He'll have like 4 heads. So very interesting. That site is unbelievable. When the bodies, whoever is the bearer, you'll be sitting in a cafe or a walla, like a chai, getting chai or something, and they'll bring down a body to the Ganga, and they dip it in the water, and then they bring it back out, and then the sun will light the body. And I believe they're with the body for like I'm probably off 4 or 7 days before they do this process. And they shave all their body hair off before they do anything. There's like a makeshift barber shop right next to the crematorium. It's not really a crematorium. There's a family that's been caring for a light in Varanasi for thousands of years. So they have one single flame that you would go and get the flame from that, and you light your loved ones with that flame down there. Yeah. While you're doing mantras and you're doing puja, ritual, and it's just heavy. And that goes on 24/7, all night long, all day long. That's also, sorry.
No,
Varanasi is also where Buddha gave the first sermon. There's Buddhist stupas. They call it the Buddhist stupa that's there. There's a whole field of stupas, and you'll see monks there. So there's a lot of variety of activity going on in that site, not just for Hindus.
And I wanted to ask you in regards to functionality of some Egyptian sites, perhaps, because there's a lot of alchemical lore and speculations. What about things in this regard? Have you come across anything in terms of like chemical production or anything having to do with these sort of things? And maybe not even Egypt, just anywhere in any of the sites that you've visited, just anything in regards to...
like alchemical.
Yeah.
There's Egypt definitely with, I guess, when I look at it, not from an alchemy perspective, if I'm looking at the lotus flower and what they were doing with it in the blue lotus in Egypt and for ceremonial use, that is very much, they're making concoctions with that, they're doing different things to enhance their spiritual being in a temple. Yeah. So the sages in ancient Egypt were definitely informed and continued all these different rituals and initiations into, becoming pharaoh, or, when Alexander the Great came, he went to the oracle in Egypt, and, these guys are creating all sorts of different concoctions for these you know, travelers basically that conquered Egypt at certain times in history.
Yeah. And so in terms of like connecting the dots, have you were mentioning earlier, there's a lot of correlation with sites in Egypt and a lot of the Hindu stuff as well. Do you think that these civilizations or these were they perhaps in communication or connected in some way, shape, or form at one point, perhaps? Or what do you make of that?
I do because I mean, not only with the trading of spices and goods, for sure. Um, there's stories, and depending on who you talk to, right? It's like Pythagoras was in Egypt. I mean, he was in Egypt and he was also in India. So, there's these ideas. There's this, it's really endless. Also, you have the Zoroastrian connection to India out of the Middle East, which I think is one that's often overlooked. When they came down after the conquest, the Parsis moved into what is now Mumbai, and they have a huge Zoroastrian community there now. So you're bringing in all that technology and that whole culture from Iran and Persia, the ancient Persian Empire, which I know they had ties to Egypt. So you had the Magi, basically. I mean, Alexander the Great came into northern India where Amritsar is in Punjab. So much trading, so much communication. I think that's another thing with the connections. When you're looking at, they were communicating. They absolutely were. The stonemasons, ancient stonemasons that went and built stuff. I've seen things that are exactly the same in Cambodia that are built in Egypt, right? Or if you go to I know, you're in Scotland. My family originates from Scotland, so I've spent a lot of time there. Rosslyn Chapel has things that, you have a camel on the chapel from ancient Egypt or the Middle East, right? The Crusades. So human beings have been communicating and traveling, and I think they were doing it a lot better than we're doing it right now,
Yeah.
is my understanding.
It's actually funny that you mentioned the Roslyn Chapel connection too, because that's something I had talked to, I think it was Timothy Hogan, because we and him were talking a little bit about that and with Templar connections. And if you look at, I think it's Roslyn Chapel in particular, and some site or some place in Istanbul, and the stonemasonry, there are particular carvings or like geometric patterns or something along these lines that are identical, and it is strongly indicative that they were related in some way, shape, or form. So that's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely what do you want to call it? Pollination, cross pollination going on, whether it was through the Templars, and I know there's a lot of ideas behind the stonemasons and what they were doing, but ancient temples and to cathedrals, or ancient Hindu site, there's a absolute grid system for building a spiritual center, a spiritual place, whether it's a mosque, whether it's a church, temple. They all have an absolute way and diagram in which they are formed, and that goes back to ancient Egypt with Dozer's step pyramid in Saqqara, which they want to, that's considered like the oldest, if we're looking at dating and stuff, as far as contemporary history goes, they like to think that the step pyramid is older than the Great Pyramid. And that was built by the architect Imhotep, who was a vizier for the pharaoh Dozer. And he was the one that first came out with what a column is. Like that was the first time columns were ever used. And they were using the idea behind nature. The Nile used to have reeds all throughout it. So when you're looking at the columns at Saqqara, they're all bundled together like bushels of reeds. So the connections throughout the world in the way that the blocks are placed, even in Scotland. I was just in Scotland in June. What April. Yeah, I was in sorry, I was in Scotland in April, and I saw a wall in Edinburgh, which is an absolutely insane city for architecture, particularly with stonemason architecture that is very unique to Egypt and the connecting points on that. Um, and it was built kind of the same style where you have a small block, big block. You kind of don't know why it's set up that way. You've seen that in Egypt and other sites. That's basically earthquake proofing the walls for the test of time. So there was people that were traveling, stonemasons were traveling to build sites. They're learning from ancient texts, probably. They're learning from, ancient, whether it's a Veda text or it's an Arabic text on building patterns or different sort of energies, what kind of stones to use. All these things were going on for so long. And now we're kind of at a point where it's like, hey, drywall and aluminum studs, bro.
I know.
Can I get you're at Home Depot and you're there and you're thinking you're building something that is
Yeah.
marvelous. It's like going to the Taj Mahal. I mean, the Taj Mahal is another site that's absolutely remarkable. It's like, could it be done today? Um, it, I don't know. The artisan side of it, yes, because these traditions are still passed down. Even in Egypt, the artisans there, people that are painting on papyrus, people that make textiles, rugs, Turkish rugs, all these things. So the history of art has been maintained through generational, because that's ritual, right?
Mm-hmm.
So families that are passing these things down, the people that do the Mackinnon marble is what the Taj Mahal is made out of. There's a certain family that own the quarries that make it and that know exactly how to quarry this marble without damaging it, the same way that when they built the Taj Mahal. So
Yeah, I follow a lot of operative stonemasons on Instagram as well, and I love watching
okay,
how they
yeah.
go about carving these very detailed and symmetrical stones because there is an art to it, and there's because some of them will do repairs on spots on particular cathedrals or whatever, and they mark it all out and they chisel it all, and it's all
Even
in the end it's just beautiful. It's fascinating.
even in Scotland, in Edinburgh, you'll see people that are from the society that the Restoration Society, where you have the stonemasons that are putting in the proper cobblestone a certain way on the road. So see a lot of that, like you said, with the cathedrals. The cathedrals, that's a whole other story, man.
Yeah.
And the Egypt connection there gets bizarre and bizarre.
Oh yeah, the Egypt connection with cathedrals.
There is some uh, in particular. Pardon me. In to the architecture, particularly in Scotland, you'll see sphinxes in Edinburgh, where on the buildings there's sphinxes. There's a lot of Egypt revival period in the architecture. It's called Scots Baronian. Our architecture was started, I want to say, in the 1840s, and these guys were doing the whole revival. They knew how to build things. They built it directionally. There's a pyramid in Scotland that was built for Prince Albert. Pardon me. You may have seen it. There's some pictures of it, I'm sure, on Instagram. It's literally out in the middle of a forest, and it's a very good sized pyramid with sizable blocks, and it's directional. It's, so it shows that through the legacy, kind of going back to the Hinduism stuff with the gurus, you're teaching, there's lineage with teaching, whether it's a stonemason, you're apprentice, you become a journeyman, then you become a master of your craft. So yeah, yeah, it
Um,
gets wild.
it does. So Zoroastrianism is something I wanted to ask you a little bit more about. I guess the origins is primarily Persian and Iranian. I think, can you tell me a little bit about Zoroastrianism, maybe belief systems, culture, anything at all, really?
Uh, it's one that is it's a newer one that I've been studying, and I got into it through, I want to say I was like looking into Cyrus the Great or somebody, and then all of a sudden, here we go, we're talking about Magi. And then on my last trip to India, I was in Mumbai, and I was like, I'm going to go check out a fire temple. The fire temples are a sacred site in Zoroastrianism, sorry. And you go to them, and it's a very, pardon me, it is a very closed off religion. Like even people that practice it that aren't born in it aren't considered Zoroastrians at all. Like, but if you're looking at Zoroaster, who, Ahura Mazda is kind of very similar to energy and the earth, they're into all the same elements like earth, wind, fire, water, ether. And if you're familiar with, have you seen the symbol of, sorry, go from talking about Hindu stuff to the Persian stuff. Ahura Mazda. Have you seen the symbol of Zoroastrianism, where it's like the guy
I'm,
in the wings with the
yes.
Okay,
Does he have a
my
lion? Like
understanding.
sometimes there's like a lion with him, or is
I
that
don't
a
know if there's
different?
a that's a different deity, but
Okay.
in India, you'll see these buildings that have those signs on them, symbols on them. So they're still teaching the ancient teachings from the ancient texts. The Avesta. Avesta is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, form of writing an alphabet. And um, the the stuff that I know about it is mostly the funerary style stuff is very interesting to me. They have, I don't know if you've heard of the Tower of Silence,
No, I haven't.
which is Zoroastrians. That I don't know if they're practicing this today. I can't speak on it. I know in Mumbai they still do in some places, I believe. I can't confirm or deny, but the Tower of Silence is where they would leave the body out after you die, and they leave the body there and put rocks over it because they don't want you to pollute the earth. They don't want you to pollute water or fire. So a fire temple, when they're doing their rituals in a fire temple, even the priests that are performing the fire temple ceremonies, they wear a hood over their face. They don't let their breath pollute fire at all.
Mm.
So some of these temples, from what I understand, have had fires going for hundreds, if not over 1,000+ years. Some of the dating, people think that Zoroastrianism is the first like monotheistic religion. Kind of tied in when I was talking about Akhenaten. It's like
Mm.
they kind of getting the dates like just like this with some of this stuff, but it has a lot to do with energy and your soul being you have a soul. What my understanding is the soul chooses the body, and then when you're born, the soul kind of breaks away, and then you spend your life putting it back together
Mm.
until you reform that symbol that you see, which is a Thora Mazda,
So
which is in the wings.
the symbol, is it with the dude with the wings and he's like holding a
Yes,
ring or something
a
like that?
ring. Yeah,
What
yeah,
does that symbolize?
yeah.
Are you
I can't speak on that. I can't, and
familiar?
I would hate to. The more I study it, it's such a like I was stating, Zoroastrianism is from family to family. Like if you're not born in it, it's you're gonna.
Mm.
I don't know how I can't. I don't want to insult anybody or make myself look like an asshole. But it's a very fascinating religion, and the sites that I saw are very, very interesting. The fire temples, the orientation of them, and how they're built. Ancient Iran is a place that is very fascinating. If anybody's interested in studying that, I would totally advise you to take a look at some of the sites because they're very unknown, right? We only hear the negative out of the Middle East. So
Yeah.
it's very undiscovered, and you can find something you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. Especially with alchemy, like we were talking about, you go down any text is kind of going to lead you to the center point in the world, right? It's almost like an access mundi of information. So it's really, it's a point. It just gets wilder. Some of the stuff I've learned with Zoroastrianism is the symbolism of it is really unique. And when they came into India, they're still a pretty good sized community there called the Parsis. And they do have schools still, but it's very much kind of its own little thing. It's really hard to get a lot of information on it without reading the ancient texts, and a lot of them are in cuneiform. So I know that their priests were taught from mouth to ear at a very young age, and a priest would be basically identified very young, and then everything was mouth to ear for a long time in that society. They only started writing their language down, and the reason why they were doing it mouth to ear is they didn't want the language itself to be changed up. They didn't want the rituals to be changed up. So if a bunch of people know how it's said, they always be like, that's not how it's said, right? It's with
Right.
ritual. If you're any sort of society or secret society does these kind of things where to put things to memory is very important. So that's part of it. That's when I look at it, I'm like, oh, this is like an active mystery school, you know, because it is so secretive. Like when I went to the fire temple, it's like the one in Mumbai, and I could point people in the direction. Just look that up, Fire Temple, Mumbai, and you're gonna be like, what am I looking at? This is rad. Like it's got beautiful symbolism on it, and the very top of it has a flame, like a stone flame. It's wild.
Yeah, that is so
I may
interesting.
have,
I'm looking
yeah,
at it right now, the fire
yeah.
temple in Mumbai. It's got like a couple,
The
I don't know what they are. The statues that are in front to the left and to the right of the entranceway.
the half human, half
Yeah.
lion.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So
Beautiful.
it's a very fascinating religion, and I've just been scratching the surface on it. When I like I said, once I saw the fire temple, I was like, I gotta start knowing more about this, and then connecting. Okay, I know Alexander the Great had some interaction with them, and other people from whether it was Pythagoras or some other philosophers, and they all went to ancient Persia at some point. So they were learning from magi that were all descendants from that group or part of that group. So there's a lot of history that all points back to a lot of these ancient sites that just don't get any sort of, I guess, they get overlooked, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Um, is there anything else in terms of any major site or any particularly striking ancient architecture that you've come across that you may be interested in putting out there and talking about before I kind of go into my closing question?
Yeah. Um, I'd say Petra, Jordan has some great sites. Obviously, the Dead Sea is incredible. There's churches. There's a church in Medina, Jordan, which has the first map of Jerusalem on the ground, like in there. Very, very interesting. There's Crusader castles throughout Jordan that are have some Knights Templar history to them, and then obviously Petra is an incredible site. I went there in 2021 during the pandemic, and it was, I think we saw 6 people, but Petra is more than just the treasury and the monastery. It has amphitheaters, it has different sort of temple complexes all throughout it. And it's such an important path in the Holy Land. You know, that I call that whole region the Holy Land, right? So you have the trading routes. So you have so many different tribes of people, so much communication, so much transaction of information and knowledge in these ancient places. And that's one I would definitely point people in. And these places are incredibly safe. Um, I wouldn't be taking people to them if I didn't think so. When we do Turkey with Ascension excursions, like we do a mix of a little bit of everything. Show them the culture, um, kind of just teaching people to get out of their, you know, comfort zone a little bit,
Yeah.
because these places can be intimidating. India is very intimidating to the non, if you haven't traveled there, I've spent a long time doing the legwork, so it's easy for somebody else. They're like, "Hey, I want to go to Egypt." I'm like, "Okay, let's do this, yalla. Let's go." It's like, "Hey, it's at this point." I'm like, India. I'm like, "Cool, I bring a backpack. I'm good to go. Like, I don't need anything else. Like, I'm good. I'm happy."
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have you yourself any spiritual inclinations or gravitations? Do you practice anything in particular? Any particular God conception in your life? Anything along those lines? I'm curious.
Um, I really, I really believe in the power of positivity, as lame as that sounds. I think through traveling and really just kind of jumping into different things and experiencing, feeling them, um, picking up energy on a site or a person, right? When somebody, you can feel somebody's energy when you talk to them. You know what I mean? You can kind of see where you're at in a conversation. It's like trust your intuition a bit more, you know, because I think that's something we're getting away from. and creating energy, which, hold on to your beliefs, and that's my biggest advice is whatever you believe, whatever it is, like, don't don't just be so, okay, somebody knocks it, create your boundaries. If you gotta, for me in particular, it's like, hey, I want to travel these places and everybody's telling me X, Y, and Z. It's like, hey, I got to be able to wear that because this is what I believe in. I believe in going towards fear. I think everybody's gone through anxiety. Everybody has problems, whether it's family or whatever it may be, problems at your job. I think really focusing on your ritual, focus on whatever it is that you love and you're passionate about your ritual. I don't care what it is, as long as it's positive for you, it will be positive to others, I believe. So that's kind of what I think.
Amen to that. Well, where would you like to direct people if they would like to maybe get a hold of you or find out any more information about your work and what you're up to?
Okay. I have a website for you guys. It is ascensionexcursions.com. Ascensionexcursions.com. And Ascension is something that my girlfriend and I created after we went to Egypt, and just we want to share these places with people and show them that, they are safe. And if you are passionate about something and are seeing a site and not really knowing what to do, we're here to help you. I help my friends with just whatever it may be. Hey, I need some advice on going to Japan. Okay, boom, I got you. You know what I mean? So I'm here to help. If you have questions about any of these places we talked about, you can reach out to me at Drew's Guide to the Galaxy Instagram, or Ascension Excursions. It's my other Instagram.
Excellent.
And yeah. So
yeah, it's definitely nice to have someone so invested and passionate to be guiding anybody. So it is cool that, people are out there doing this, and so with such love and appreciation for a lot of these structures and ancient sites, and kind of carrying on these the knowledge and the understanding of these sort of things. So I'm appreciative that you're out there doing what you're doing, and this was a awesome and informative conversation. So yeah, I just want to thank you again so much for coming on.
of course, bro. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I know we dug into so many different things, but hey, like I said, don't limit yourself.
Absolutely.
Go where your heart takes you.
All right, brother. I appreciate you.
All right, bro. Thank you.